when I started the APs, I started them after my ISC exams were done of the 11th grade. And I had 2 full months to only focus on the APs and study on the APs and completely chew the books through so that I have a complete and full understanding of the subject that I'm studying. And when you have unadulterated time only focused and devoted on one subject, you would really have a good capacity of withholding that information.
Welcome to another episode of the College Crash by Let's Unbound, where we talk about how to get into the top Ivy League colleges, how to prepare for your test prep, and build your profile. I am your host, Nishant Chawla, co-founder of Let's Unbound. I personally work with a lot of high schoolers, helping them in their college prep and test preparation. Today, we are diving into the world of advanced placement examination, which is one of the key stepping stones as we prepare for the top universities. And I'm glad to welcome Malay Mehta as our guest who would be sharing his experience of clearing two AP examination. Welcome to the podcast, Malay.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for having me, sir. Really looking forward to the podcast on this topic of advanced.
Yeah, great, Malay. So first up, Malay, right? And I think it's a question that I ask for every examination. Can you explain, what are AP examination and why are they so important for high school students?
So AP examinations are college coursework. The level is of college, and therefore it's a notch higher than what you would be studying in high school. And so when you're giving an AP examination, you're effectively showing the university you're applying that you're ready for their coursework, you're ready for their material, and you're also showing your enthusiastic interest in that field of study. So taking my example, I gave the micro and macroeconomic APs, and my objective was to major in economics and finance, and which is why I gave these two APs to show my university that I'm capable in the study in the field of economics, and I have a good understanding of economics, and I can even deal with the college coursework, and therefore I'll be a good fit in your university in the economics program particularly. So APs are a wonderful way to show your skill sets in that particular subject, and it also helps the university gain confidence in your ability in that particular major.
Understood. And I apart from I think what you mentioned, right, in terms of proving your credentials, I believe it also helps you get college credits, right? So while you are at the university, you don't need to take those courses, right? So you also save on some of the cost in terms of your university tuition fee.
Yeah, so there's two ways of looking at APs. The first way is looking at APs as a way to add to your app to your resume, to your CV, and it's more of brownie points in terms of the extracurricular in the form of good AP scores. And the other way of looking at it is also college credits, where you can effectively drop off from the introductory classes. So, for example, when you have a certain score in each AP, so say a 4 or a 5, that usually means you can drop introductory classes in that field of study, and you can reduce the cost of education in college and in university. So that's another quite a large, quite a substantial benefit rather, to be able to reduce the cost of funding, and that therefore a lot of students also opt for AP in high school so they can cut short their learning curve in university.
Perfect, right? And I think it makes a lot more sense, right? Because while you are in high school and if you are able to spend that kind of time, right, the longer term impact is very meaningful. Okay, so,
Yes, sir.
so while there are multiple AP courses available out, right? So how do you decide which exams to take and what's the right, grade to start preparing for these examinations?
So when I joined Cathedral in the 11th grade, and that's when I heard of the term AP. So I was already behind the ball when I had to start prepping for these examinations. So I started and gave micro and macroeconomics as the two AP courses in the 11th grade. So at the beginning of my 12th is when I gave the exams in May of 2023. But I've seen students who've been giving the APs even in the 9th and the 10th. And there is absolutely no reason why you should not be one of those students. Always starting early has profound benefits, and if you're able to give APs in the 9th and you gain the confidence, you can really sail through them in the 10th, 11th, and even 12th. And there is no limit really as to how many, what age you can start. But I would always recommend that take an AP subject you're confident with. Don't take a difficult subject for proving your mettle for the sake of it, because I would always say a 5 in an easier level AP is better than a 3 or a 4 in an AP, which is extremely difficult. To give a very crude example, there's calculus AB and there's calculus BC, right? So BC, everyone knows, is the more difficult level of coursework. So trying to be and say that I will get a 5 in BC, but end up with a lower score is not what I would recommend. But I would always say go for the easier one, ace it completely, knock it out of the park, and then try to up your game and go to a more difficult.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? And for some students, who wants to establish maybe top-notch credential, the other approach might also work out there. And does, your specialization, what you're planning to do in the college, that also impacts your choice of AP examination that you pick up?
Perfect. So, in fact, I really loved the entire process of giving the APs because it gave me an understanding of the subject on the college level, and it helped boost my confidence even in terms of what I was studying. So, I've taken the ISC board, and when I was able to get a good score in both micro and macro economics in the AP level, I was quite confident when it even came to my ISC coursework. So, I always recommend any exam, any competition that pushes your competence, makes you think and learn harder. I think was always having a lot of benefits which you won't be able to see directly, but they will always have some impact in the future. So I myself noticed that my economics generally improved quite substantially after giving the AP coursework. So I would always recommend giving APs to students so that they can show colleges that they are ready to meet that level of academic rigor.
Makes sense. And my question was also more in terms of, for example, you chose economics because you are also targeting a specialization,
100%. Yeah. So I
right?
want to major in economics in Dartmouth College, economics and statistics, which is why I gave both micro and macro APs to show the university that I want to study economics and I'm focused in that direction.
Perfect, right? So moving on in terms of, looking at how do you start preparing? So what are some effective ways to prepare for AP examination? Because it's essentially academic exam after all, right? It's not like a high stake test prep like SAT, right? Which you can probably manage in 3 to 4 months period of time. But AP is much wider in terms of the syllabus and the course content, right? So if you can help us some effective ways and study techniques that work for you.
Sure. So when it comes to the APs, at least I can speak for the economic APs quite well. Um, for ISC students, I feel it's a very perfect time slot when the APs are positioned. So the APs are placed in May each year, and for ISC students and even I think CBSE students, our exams end in March. So for me, I had absolutely no time to study for the APs before, with so many other things going on, with the SAT going on, with academic, with our own ISC exams, the prelims coming in. So when I started the APs, I started them after my ISC exams were done of the 11th grade, and I had 2 full months to only focus on the APs and study on the APs and completely chew the books through so that I have a complete and full understanding of the subject that I'm studying. And when you have unadulterated time only focused and devoted on one subject, you really have a good capacity of withholding that information. And stick to two APs. If you're confident, go with two. If you really think you have the capacity, go with three. But pushing the limit and then getting a low score on a few APs is not something I would advise. So I knew my capacity was not to push beyond two, and therefore I stuck with two. Ensure I get a five in both, and that's eventually did that. That's what happened. I was able to score a five in both, and I would always recommend that be safe rather than sorry. Do not push for a third one and then get a low score, which you would end up regretting.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned about one approach that you took, right? Just 2 months crammed and crash course kind of thing. You did it by yourself, right? And what we have seen students, because depending upon which school board you are, whether you're in IB, right, your exams go up to May, and then your different boards and examination can extend much later. I see a lot of students starting somewhere around September, October, right? Because then they get a 6 months time period. They
Yeah,
start slow, and as they go into the preparation, then they increase the
and
time
then
and
you increase the
they spend
intensity.
on the AP
Correct.
examination. So I think there are two different approaches.
Yeah.
One that work for you, and I think I've seen other approaches. The students that we recommend them to start somewhere a year prior, more like 6 months in September, October time
No,
frame.
that's 100% the right way of doing it, sir. But you are, of course, the most sensible thing to do is always start early, get ahead of the others, get a good understanding of the subject, at least read through the book, have a good, clear idea of what you're studying, and then you can always push up the intensity and the level of your rigor as the exam approaches closer.
Right. And as you prepared, right? So while, I know 2 months was a less time, even then you scored a perfect 5 on 5. What were some of the key challenges that you faced, or maybe some of your classmates might also have faced while preparing for AP examination? And if you had to go back and change something, what would you change?
So for the economics coursework, I would always recommend try as much visual learning as possible. So I realize that the number of graphs involved in the APs are significantly more than what you will do usually, which is more of long, lengthy answers. Because this is more of abstract and visual understanding, which requires you to see YouTube videos, which requires you to practice those graphs daily. So there's no substitute whatsoever in the whole world for practice. And that stands for the SAT, ACT, for APs, for any exam you give, you must have the practice. So always I used to prefer visual learning. Whenever there's a challenge, you always have your economics teacher or whichever subject it is, you have the teacher in school to help address those issues. And whenever a challenge is there, you have a lot of resources on the net. You can Google the question, you can understand how it is, but always note the mistakes beforehand and work towards improving the mistakes. Do not let the mistakes pass by, because when that happens, you will eventually do the same thing in the examination, and that will not lead to a good score. So always note your pluses and your minuses and work with both in tandem, so that you can eventually end up with a very strong understanding of what you're studying.
Yeah, and I think that sounds really a good technique. And that's where we do a lot of diagnostics also early on in the process, where we first identify our strengths and weaknesses, right? And then as we progress, we look at, okay, how we are doing on our strong areas and then how we are doing on our weak areas, right? And I think spending that meaningful time to maximize score in your strong areas and to ensure at least you clear the basic cutoffs in your weak areas can really help you get that 5. And what about, looking at the examination, right? So this examination, again, you have to sit for long hours. You have a combination of multiple choice questions, the free response question. So how did you did exam simulated exercises at home?
So I was in fact very lucky to use the resources of these two books. So I have these two books which I use mainly, 5 Steps to 5, for both macroeconomics, and microeconomics. So, and I also use Barron. So these gave me access to a lot of tests, free tests available in these books. So that gave me thorough MCQ practice. And the thing with MCQs is, in subjects like economics, it's all objective. Of course, free response questions is a whole different ball game. But in economics, there is right and there is a wrong. So when you have MCQs, when you've understood the work you're studying, then it gets somewhat of it becomes autopilot. And you start over time, you get the hang of what the answers are and how you're going to answer them. Free response questions requires a different level of thinking. That's where all the graphs come in. That's where the practice comes in, and that's where connecting two different topics which have the same underlying interest. That's where your thinking will be used, and that's where you'll be tested mainly. So both require a different way of going at it. One requires you to have a quick understanding. So MCQs is where you need to be quick, you need to be fast, the time is less, so you need to be able to go through all the MCQs in the given time with efficiency and with confidence that once you have ticked the right answer, you don't need to go back and recheck it, because all these exams will really put you to the limit in terms of speed. And the free response question, you need to be, of course, neat and tidy is the most basic thing, but you need to express your idea without gobbling the information you're putting on in front of the corrector, and have clear-cut graphs. If I have to say, the golden word in APs is understanding your graphs, because graphs will come in MCQs, graphs will come in your free response questions. And if you don't understand them, if you can't draw them, even at 2 o'clock in the night, if you're woken up and you're asked to draw that, you should be able to understand what the graph is and what it's trying to tell you. So I think that is a big requirement in the economics section. And I think this even translates to other aspects and other subjects in the AP exams.
Right. And I think what you said makes sense, because we have to have a different approach for MCQs and for the free response questions, right? So whether it's computer science, we look at, calculus, all would have more or less a similar pattern, where I see a lot of our students, they try to maximize score in the MCQs, because FRQs to some extent have a level of subjectivity, right? So I might be able to get a perfect score over there, but yeah, you aim for 90 plus, 80 plus over there to ensure you get an overall 5 in the AP examination, right? So Malay, if we just go back to understand, I know you spent 2 months, but if somebody has to do it today, right, and plan, what would be some steps you would recommend, a kind of a roadmap, what they can possibly do as they start preparing for their AP examination?
Perfect. So the first and most important thing I would say is, choose an AP subject you're passionate about. Do not take an AP subject for the heck of showing the university that I can have diversity in this. One example of this is, when I was in the 11th, I thought that let me take an AP subject in psychology and let me try something different. But the moment I opened the book for the first time in a library, I noticed that there's a lot of information which I'm not quite interested in, and it doesn't make me want to actually open the book and read it. And it's more of me being forced into doing it. So when I would recommend anything to anyone, I always say, go with something you would like to study, which would actually get you excited and get you thinking about how you can apply this in school, in normal thinking and in normal cases.
So step one is figure out a subject where you have an interest and you are aiming probably for your specialty. That's step one. What next?
100%. So once you get the passion in place, once you're excited about the subject, then try to correlate the subject with what you're already learning in school. So you will notice, like, if in economics, there's always demand and supply, right? There's always market forces, and you will find this in every single book of economics. The first chapter, a monkey who will learn economics will start with these concepts. So try to correlate concepts with what you're studying in school with what you're doing in APs. The rigor, of course, is going to be different. The level of understanding required is going to be different. But when you can draw connections and parallels, that's when your understanding will further enhance.
So that will be step 2 you would recommend, right?
Correct.
So
So
first choose
step,
the subject, second, try to see what's happening at the school, and
correct.
you start from there and then extend your learning to the AP level. What else? What would
Yeah.
be the
So then, as you move on, once you have a somewhat understanding of what you're saying, then studying, set goals in terms of the chapters you need to cover. Because at the end of the day, this is like a textbook you're trying to prepare for, and with the limited amount of time you have, you need to set weekly goals that by this week this chapter should be done. By this week, I should be done with this. And eventually, when you're thorough with the portion, when you have a good understanding of how to tackle the MCQs and the FRQs, then you go to step 4, which is practicing, practicing, and practicing. And that is only through tests. When you have the simulated environment of giving an AP exam with that time limit, with the MCQ time limit being different and the FRQ time limit being different, then you can actually understand what it's like sitting in that examination hall. When you mimic that, you will realize the results will be quite similar to what you're getting at home to what you're going to be getting eventually on the exam day.
right? And I think that's a very good structured process, right? That these 4 steps really help, right? And at Let's Unbound, we do a more or less similar approach. One thing that we add on is the diagnostic test early on in the process to see the current level of students, where they are lying in terms of their prep and understanding. And then we customize the sessions accordingly, right? So they go through all the rigor in terms of concept,
Yes.
in terms of building their accuracy, building their speed, doing sectional and full length tests. And then, a lot of exam simulated environment, right? That's very, very important. Mock test to be given so that you are confident once you enter the examination hall, right? So you find a lot of familiarity and it's not new information for you. Right. So good. So thanks for a lot of these insight, Malay. So my next question is more forward looking, right? So, passing an AP itself is a great achievement, but what comes next? How can students leverage their AP examination for college admission?
So as I mentioned in the beginning, there's 2 ways of looking at it. One is an extracurricular mindset, and the other is to actually get college credit. And both are very, very good ways, and which is why I always will preach that giving APs is a must for students who want to stand out. Even for IB students, I would say that a lot of IB students think that the curriculum of IB is already rigorous enough for APs being non-necessary or like being redundant. But I would say if you want to really stand out, you need to stand out by being that one goldfish. And when you do that, you're effectively giving APs and you're showing the university that I can do IB, I can do APs, I can do everything and more, but I will still be there on top of my academics no matter what I'm doing. So APs, I think, can be done by any student. There is no limitation to what which stream of studying you're in, HSC, ISC, CBSC, IB. And effectively, APs show, as I mentioned before, they show the university they're passionate about the subject, number 1. Number 2, they show your skill sets in that subject. And number 3, they show your focus that you're going to stick with that major. And you're clear from right now that that's what you're interested in. You're going to continue with that till the very end. So
Right.
Yeah.
And do you get a special section in Common App to add your AP scores?
Yes,
or
so
just part of
in
your
the Common App, you can mention your AP scores as well. You can, and it was with great pride that I was able to mention my scores. And when you give the APs and you prepare for them well, you will have the same feeling. And trust me, having these scores are really like feathers in your cap, which will overall add up to your application. So like I said, there's so many different aspects to an application that eventually when all of it comes together, it'll be really strong for any university to not be able to reject your overall application. Going to the second part, which is the college credits. Even in the college credits front, you can, when you go to the university with the AP scores that you have, you can tell them that I want to drop the introductory classes. And that too, it's shortens, as I said, it shortens the learning curve. You get a boost into your college level work and the confidence that you've already given the AP. So you have an understanding of what you're studying. And that reduces the cost of education, that reduces the time you take in the university, and it overall speeds up the whole process of your entire application and the college when you just enter.
Right, and I think those are some prime benefits of AP, right? So in terms of course establishing your credentials, but it does save you a cost in the longer run when you go for college, right? So I think a lot of interesting ideas and insights. So Malay, any final words? Maybe I have missed something, which might add value to other high schoolers who are preparing for AP. So any final words of wisdom you would like to share
So not words of wisdom, sir. I'm just whatever I've learned. As I said, when I've been a student a few months back. So, but in terms of my experience, I would always say that choose the AP you're passionate about. Don't overdo it. Stick with what you can, what is within your capacity. Stick with subjects you think you will have a good understanding of, and do not try to push beyond your limits. Get a score which you're proud of, which is representative of your abilities. And when you do all these things, you will really be happy with the eventual outcome, and you will really show universities that you're capable, you're talented, and you're interested in the field you're studying in. And APs is not for a certain board, but I would say it's for everyone. And it's really a lovely experience if you choose a subject. I really enjoyed. I spent time reading through these books, and I really had a completely redefined thinking of the subject of economics. And I've told you, it benefits you in multiple fields, not just your scores, but even widens your perspective in the subject itself. And the benefits will keep coming. So always go ahead and take the shot, go ahead with the APs, and that's all I can say.
Right, and I can see the passion, Malay, right? So in terms of the learning experience you had, right? So and I think that passion emerges when you have a lot of new learning, right? So when we learn something new, there's a sense of achievement, there's a sense of intellectual satisfaction, and that's something I
100%.
can see out
Yes.
there, right? So thanks, Malay, for all those valuable insight. So Malay, if you have to help our audience with, so to say, top 5 tips for preparing AP, micro and macroeconomics, what would be those, right? Because a lot of times students have questions around specific subjects.
Correct. So number one thing to do is always to understand the format that the exams have. So for micro and macroeconomics, both there's about two sections. There's MCQs and there's FRQs. And you should understand how many marks the weightage each section has, and the number of questions and the amount of time you have. So MCQs account for 66% of the total score, and free response questions the other 33%. And you've got about 60 questions. You want to have only 70 minutes to complete it. So when I tell you 60 questions in 70 minutes, you should already be thinking that there's about 1 minute and a little more time per question if you want to really ace this exam. So that just gives you an idea of the time crunch that you're going to be dealing with when you're going in the MCQ section. The FRQ section, on the other hand, has only 3 large questions, maybe 1 long and 2 slightly smaller ones. And these, again, you get an hour to complete. So the FRQ is really going to be testing your understanding of the matter. It's going to be deep thinking questions, not as much as speed, but more of a good well explained graphs and a good way of explaining the question and the way you answer it. So that's what's going to be tested in the FRQ. Number 2 is you should always be reviewing the course content. You should understand the main topics that, for example, macroeconomics, the main topics are economic concepts, the measurement of economic performance, national income, price determination, inflation, unemployment, stabilization policies. So it's about economics on a larger scale. So macro is on a larger scale, micro is on an in-depth personal scale. So there'll be larger global issues of inflation and unemployment in macroeconomics. There'll be international trade, there'll be finance. So all of these the understanding of all of these topics is quite crucial when you want to ace these exams. Then you should always, as I mentioned, I've been using the 5 steps to 5 for macroeconomics and microeconomics, but you should have the right appropriate study material. So there's a lot of textbooks you can do. There's Barron's, there is 5 steps to 5. You can even use online resources like Khan Academy, and the College Board also does offer a few video tutorials, so you can go through these websites as well. And I've already mentioned this, but number 4 would be always keep practicing. Take the test. Once you get an understanding of what you're studying, give the practice test. Familiarize yourself with the format and the feeling of being in a real exam, and focus on MCQs and FRQs, whichever you're weaker in. So understand where your pluses are and focus on the minuses to even them out together. And lastly, graphs will always take priority number 1. Graphs and diagrams, that's essentially entirely in the FRQ section, and they will also be tested in MCQ. So get an understanding of both. Graphs, you should be able to draw them, you should be able to read them. And when you're able to do both of these, there's supply and demand curves, there's loanable funds, there's money and market diagrams. So there'll be a lot of different graphs you have to go, and there'll be so much more, but you have to understand what the graph is asking you and how to interpret the graph. And again, these are just general principles for any AP exam, but you should always have your time management in place. You should know which questions to deal with first, and you should have good answering strategies. Decide which questions you want to tackle first, which you want to keep for the end, and how you're going to pace out your exam. If you're confident with the starting few questions on a certain topic, deal with them first and then go to the end. So there is no fixed way of dealing with an exam. You should just go with what makes you feel comfortable and what you've been consistently practicing at home, and mimic that in the actual exam. So this is just a few tips on economics per se, but some of these can also be replicated to other subjects as well. So there is no right or wrong. You can choose your way of studying, whatever gives you the most satisfaction, gives you the most confidence, and then go ahead and make it work.
Yeah, and I think makes perfect in Malay, just what you said, right? Because the same ideas could be applied to most of the subjects. And I think two things that stand out for me, also what you mentioned, right? For a subject like economics, you have to understand the graph and the diagrams, right? Especially for the FRQs, you can't, go into the examination without understanding them, because you would be asked to either interpret or make them yourself, right? And then the second bit, which is relevant for all APs, is in terms of your exam strategy. And as you mentioned, different students can build their own strategies, right? So one of the strategies that we work at Let's Unbound, where we ask the student to attempt the examination in 2 to 3 rounds, right? Where you figure out easy questions in round one, right? The topics you are much more familiar. So attempt them, consider your overall exam as 2 or 3 sub-exam. Then you go to the medium levels, and then you go to the difficult levels. Right? So that's one approach we work. Different students can have different approach, but this approach has really worked for our student, because what happens with this approach, with the 50 to 60% easy question, they ensure they clear the cutoff. So they at least get the 3 AP, right? And then they maximize the score by going to the medium and difficult questions. So they, aim towards 4 and 5. So we have to remember our goal, right? The first goal is to at least get a 3 so that you clear the examination, right? And the second goal is to maximize. So you then target for 4 and 5.
That's good.
Right. So thanks, Malay, for sharing those insights and your experience around AP, micro and macroeconomics. I wish you all the best as you move from India to US at Dartmouth.
Thank you so much, sir. And I really hope some of the, whatever I was able to share, the few tips that helped me, I hope you all can mimic the same and they help you as well in the future. And wishing you all the very best for the AP examinations. Thank you so much, sir, for having me, and really looking forward to the future. Thank you.
And, to all our listeners, we would be bringing you more episodes from the College Crest, where we would be talking about the insights and tips and strategies, how to navigate your path to the college, whether you are in middle school or high school. We would be breaking down all the topics around test prep, SAT, APs, building your profile, writing your applications, SOPs, right? So stay tuned with us. You can subscribe to our podcast on multiple platforms. The link you will find in the comments. And you can visit our website also to find more information /College Crest. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.